For 500 years, one book has haunted the minds of rulers like a ghost that refuses to die. Not because it sings of justice or dreams of peace, but because it dares to tell the truth about power. Machiavelli's The Prince is not a guide for saints. It is not a prayer for the meek. It is a mirror held up to the face of those who seek to dominate, revealing every crack, every flaw, every brutal instinct hiding behind crowns and titles. It speaks the language of war, not love. It whispers the rules of survival, not redemption. It does not beg you to be good. It dares you to be real, and this precisely is why it terrifies, because it strips the noble mask from leadership and shows us the beast beneath. Power is not earned by virtue. It is seized by cunning. Those who hesitate are devoured. Those who doubt are forgotten. Machiavelli does not flatter the soul. He flays it. He does not point to the heavens. He digs into the mud. And what he finds is simple, eternal, and cruel. The world is not ruled by ideals. It is ruled by the will to rule. Are you ready to see the world as it is? Or will you keep clinging to the lies that make you feel safe? Before we judge The Prince, we must meet the man who wrote it, not as a dusty historical figure, but as a soul exiled from comfort, banished by power, forged in fire. Niccolò Machiavelli was not born in a palace, but in a battlefield disguised as a city. Florence, 1469. Surrounded by betrayals, plots, invasions, and the fickle whims of fortune, he witnessed firsthand the carnage behind every throne. He dined with diplomats and devils, watched popes scheme like pirates, and saw alliances dissolve like smoke between dusk and dawn. This was not politics, it was chess with knives. And in that chaos he did not ask, what is good? He asked, what works? Then came the fall. The Medici returned, and like so many before him, Machiavelli became disposable. Accused, tortured, cast into the silence of exile, he found himself stripped of influence, abandoned by power, reduced to ink and memory. But that is when his vision sharpened. In disgrace, he found clarity. On his farm, far from the court, he did not write a plea for justice. He wrote The Prince, a gift to those who had destroyed him. A book not of forgiveness, but of revelation. It was a mirror held to the faces of kings, inviting them to see their own savagery with pride, and perhaps, just perhaps, to recognize in him not a traitor, but a prophet. The Prince does not speak in abstractions. It does not preach about utopias or heavens to come. It speaks of blood, steel, and survival. Its truths are not wrapped in kindness, they are sharpened like blades. Machiavelli tells us that the world is not a place of fairness, but of forces. The river of fortune floods without warning, and those who wait for the perfect moment drown beneath its weight. But those who possess virtù, that ferocious mix of courage, cunning, and instinct, do not plead with the current. They build the dam. They redirect the flood. They force chaos to kneel. In this, Machiavelli was not a cynic. He was a realist with a lion's heart. He saw in men like Cesare Borgia not just cruelty, but brilliance. Borgia did not hesitate. He saw threats and crushed them. He saw loyalty fray and severed it with ceremony. He understood the game, and he played it to win. To rule, Machiavelli argues, is not to wait for permission. It is to strike before the world even knows a strike is coming. This is not evil, it is clarity. And clarity in a world built on illusions is the most dangerous weapon of all. What you do with it, says Machiavelli, is entirely up to you. Is it better to be loved or to be feared? A gentle soul hesitates before answering. Machiavelli does not. He answers with the coldness of a surgeon. It is far safer to be feared. Love is beautiful, yes, but it is fragile, fleeting, conditional. It depends on the moods of others, the tides of affection, the whims of the crowd. Fear, however, is rooted in instinct. It carves itself into the nerves. It does not ask permission. It commands, it endures. But, and here lies the dark genius of Machiavelli, fear must never decay into hatred. Hatred breeds conspiracies. Hatred gives birth to daggers. A feared ruler is respected. A hated one is already dead. This is not a celebration of cruelty, but a warning about weakness. Leadership is not friendship. It is not therapy. It is not about being liked. It is about being obeyed. 2. Command obedience. You must create boundaries. To maintain them, you must show that crossing them has consequences. This is why Machiavelli urges the prince to strike only when necessary and to strike hard, once and never again. A long, slow cruelty is poison. A clean cut is discipline. The goal is not terror. The goal is stability. And the path to stability is not paved with affection, but with control. Can you wield power without losing your soul? Or will your need to be loved be your downfall? Leadership, Machiavelli teaches, is a performance, but not one of sincerity. The prince must appear virtuous, not be virtuous. Why? Because the eyes of the people see only the surface. They do not know your intentions. They cannot dissect your motives. They judge based on image, posture, tone, and ritual. So give them what they need to believe. Wear mercy like a robe, even when your hands are stained with necessity. Swear oaths you never intend to keep, as long as they serve your cause. Light candles in churches, kiss infants in markets, wear the mask of the saint while plotting like a general. Hypocrisy? No. Strategy. The truth is a luxury the ruler cannot afford. Perception is power, and illusion, wielded well, is mightier than the sword. This does not mean that the prince becomes hollow or false, quite the opposite. He becomes double, a man of masks and marrow, a creature who speaks in symbols and strikes in silence. Pope Alexander VI, a man Machiavelli admired, lied with. Elegance and ruled through belief. His enemies underestimated him not because he was weak, but because he looked devout. In modern terms, this is the polished CEO with a benevolent smile who quietly dismantles empires behind glass doors. This is the politician who invokes unity while signing contracts of domination. Power is not seized by those who are honest. It is seized by those who understand what people need to see in order to obey. In this theater of politics, the prince must be the playwright, the actor, and the shadow behind the curtain. To believe otherwise is to be ruled, not to rule. Cruelty. The word itself trembles on the tongue, as if speaking it might awaken demons. But Machiavelli does not tremble. He separates cruelty into two species, the cowardly and the calculated. The first is the domain of tyrants, long, erratic, sadistic spectacles that breed only resentment and revenge. But the second, the cruelty well used, is surgical, swift, measured, done not out of malice but out of necessity. When a leader must strike, he must strike once and then rebuild. Prolonged pain breeds chaos. Decisive pain creates order. In our time, this is not the guillotine, but the layoff, the closed factory, the cold decision made in a single night to preserve a greater whole. Harsh, yes, but far more humane than uncertainty stretched into months. This is the paradox modern leaders fear, that to avoid being cruel, they become crueler. They delay, they deny, they hope things. will resolve themselves, and in doing so they allow suffering to fester, mutate, explode. Machiavelli would call this weakness in disguise. The true leader acts not to appease conscience, but to preserve structure. The general who hesitates loses his army. The ruler who dithers loses his people. Pain is unavoidable, but it can be guided, channeled, contained. Like cauterizing a wound, it must be done with intention. The mark of a great leader is not kindness, it is the clarity to do what others cannot, and the wisdom to know when to stop. Do you have that clarity, or will you seek comfort while your kingdom rots? Surround yourself with advisors, Machiavelli warns, but never surrender judgment. The greatest danger to a ruler is not the enemy outside the gates, it is the whisper inside the room. Flatterers, parasites, those who mirror your opinions to gain favor, who nod at every decision, who feed your ego while they drain your strength. The prince must listen, but he must also command. He must question the motives of every counselor, test every opinion against his own instinct, and above all, retain the final word. A leader who delegates his judgment becomes a puppet. A leader who rejects all advice becomes a tyrant. The art lies in balance, in listening without obeying, in commanding without isolating. Then there are the mercenaries, the temporary allies, the contractors, the consultants who offer strength without loyalty. In Machiavelli's time, they were hired soldiers. Today they are the outsourced experts, the fair-weather allies, the influencers who vanish when storms arrive. Useful? Yes, but deadly if relied upon. For when the crisis comes, the mercenary fights for gold, not for you. The true power of a ruler lies not in what he rents, but in what he builds. A strong state, a loyal team, a trusted core. These are the roots that endure when the winds of fortune shift. Machiavelli screams through the centuries, "Do not build your throne on borrowed bones." If you want to rule, raise your own army, forge your own steel, and never forget, loyalty bought is loyalty that can be sold. Fortune, Machiavelli writes, is a woman, a river, a storm. She is wild, unpredictable, and cruel. She favors the bold, but devours the slow. No man controls her, but the wise, those armed with virtue, can shape her flow, build dikes against her floods, and ride her tempests like gods in exile. Fortune tests all rulers. She gives and then takes. She offers opportunity wrapped in peril. And when she turns, she does not knock, she crashes, she breaks. She sweeps away the unprepared with no regard for their dreams. Power belongs not to those who pray to her, but to those who prepare for her betrayal. This is not pessimism, it is preparation. Look at history. The empires that fell were not struck down by external forces, they rotted from within, clinging to old methods, old customs, old myths. They refused to adapt. They mistook past victories for permanent truths. And so, they perished. The prince who survives is the one who transforms, who moves with the times, who abandons outdated tools, who reinvents himself before necessity forces it. Adaptation is not weakness, it is sovereignty over change. Machiavelli calls it the highest form of intelligence, the ability to act boldly when boldness is required and cautiously when caution is wiser. Do not marry your strategies, do not worship your habits, love only what works. That is the creed of the survivor and the crown of the ruler who endures. Machiavelli's genius was not that he loved power, it's that he dared to speak of it without perfume. He dared to strip it of myths, to pull back the curtains of piety and reveal the machine beneath. He did not write for the crowd. He wrote for those who bear the burden of decision, for those who know that ideals, when tested by fire, often turn to ash. In The Prince, morality is not denied, it is bypassed. Not because virtue has no place, but because the world often gives no room for it. The battlefield is not a place for dreamers. The throne is not a reward for the just. Those who wait for justice to crown them will die with clean hands and empty coffins. This is why The Prince was burned, why it was banned, why priests spat upon it and rulers read it in secret. Because it speaks a forbidden truth, that good men rarely rise, and when they do, they rarely stay. To rule, one must be willing to act when others hesitate, to see clearly what others blur with. Dogma and emotion. Nietzsche would call this the will to power, the instinct to shape, to impose, to survive, not as a victim of history, but as its author. The prince is not moral nor immoral. He is beyond good and evil. He acts not because it is right or wrong, but because the moment demands it. And in that clarity he finds a freedom the virtuous will never taste, the freedom to command reality instead of praying to it. To lead is to manipulate appearances. Machiavelli knew this long before. The age of cameras, press releases, and curated social feeds. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." This is not deceit. This is wisdom. The masses do not crave truth. They crave narrative. They seek symbols, gestures, rituals. They want to feel that their leader is strong, just, merciful. It does not matter whether he is. A ruler who masters appearances controls not just armies, but imaginations. And in the theater of power, belief is more potent than fact. The prince must become a myth, invulnerable, decisive, sacred, not because he is a god, but because men obey gods more easily than men. Modern rulers still follow this script, even if they've never read Machiavelli. The statesman who poses beside disaster victims, the CEO who dons the worker's uniform for a photo op, the general who cries on camera only to sign off on bombings hours later. They know what the prince taught centuries ago, that optics are the real battlefield. Today, we dress this in new words: branding, public relations, media strategy, but the soul of the game remains unchanged. Appearance is not the enemy of truth, it is the currency of power. And those who refuse to play, those who cling to authenticity as a moral pedestal, are destined to be crushed beneath the boots of those who learn to lie beautifully. Fear is not the enemy of leadership. It is its foundation. Machiavelli does not romanticize terror. He dissects it. He understands that fear, when used correctly, is not chaos. It is control. Fear draws lines in the sand. It teaches obedience without the need for constant surveillance. It speaks directly to the animal within us, the part that flinches, submits, survives. But fear must be precise, clean, rational. It is not the wild scream of the despot. It is the quiet certainty of consequence. The ruler who understands this rules not with brutality, but with presence. The subjects do not need to see the prince every day. They only need to know what happens when his rules are broken. Yet fear is a fire that must never be left untended. If it burns too hot, it consumes the ruler himself. When fear becomes hatred, it mutates. It gathers in silence, behind closed doors, in whispered conspiracies and midnight oaths. Hatred blinds. Hatred erodes respect and invites revenge. Machiavelli warns us, a prince must avoid being hated at all costs. He must be firm, but not cruel, respected, not reviled. This balance is delicate, but essential. Even the most feared ruler must show moments of mercy, of reason, of restraint, not to be loved, but to be seen as just enough to avoid rebellion. In the calculus of power, fear is a tool, hatred is a trap. The greatest mistake a leader can make is to rely solely on illusion. Appearances can open doors, but only strength keeps them from closing. A ruler who only appears virtuous but lacks the will to act when reality demands it is not a prince, he is a puppet in costume. Machiavelli makes it clear. Deception is a weapon, not a shield. It must be paired with force, with discipline, with ruthless precision when necessary. Otherwise, the illusion collapses. The people wake up, the myth unravels, and what remains is a hollow man, exposed, mocked, and overthrown. The prince must therefore be both fox and lion, cunning enough to avoid traps, strong enough to break wolves. This duality, appearance and substance, is what separates rulers from victims. A modern leader who performs well on stage but panics behind the curtain is doomed. So too is the brute who wields power without understanding optics. The master of power must do both. He must inspire with vision and act with clarity. He must move crowds with stories and move systems with strategy. This is not duplicity, it is sovereignty. The prince becomes not just a man, but a force. Not merely someone who holds power, but someone who embodies it. And to embody power is to accept the eternal burden, to stand alone in the storm, shaping the chaos into form, even as the world calls you cruel. When pain is required, it must be quick, clean, and final. Dragging out punishment, delay, or reform through endless committees and soft words breeds only decay. Machiavelli is unflinching here. Cruelty, when inevitable, must be done all at once. One strike, one fire, one purge, and then healing. This is not savagery, it is clarity. Think of a surgeon amputating to save the body, a prince who prolongs suffering out of cowardice. Becomes not merciful but monstrous. Far better to make the hard cut, face the fury once and then rebuild in peace. Those who bleed their people slowly always drown in that blood eventually. In today's world, this truth still applies. The CEO who makes one brutal decision to save a collapsing company often survives. The leader who clings to appearances, who avoids confrontation, who spreads the pain across months, is swallowed by resentment. People can forgive the axe. They do not forgive the needle that never stops piercing. Leadership, Machiavelli reminds us, is not about avoiding pain. It is about mastering it, knowing when to cause it, how much, and to whom. A leader who cannot do this does not lead. He waits. He hopes, and hope in the game of power is the luxury of those without it. No reign is eternal, no system invincible, no leader untouchable. Time, like fortune, has no loyalty. It turns kings into corpses, empires into ruins, and certainties into absurdities. Machiavelli saw this clearly. Power is not something you hold, it is something you maintain, and maintenance requires evolution. Those who rule as they did 10 years ago are already finished. The tactics that brought you to the throne will one day betray you. That which gave you power yesterday may be the very thing that destroys you tomorrow. The greatest danger for the ruler is not revolt, it is irrelevance. Adaptability, then, is the highest form of strength, more than courage, more than knowledge. It is the capacity to shed skin, to change form, to see the winds shift and move before the storm arrives. The wise ruler does not resist change, he becomes it. He studies the terrain not to master it forever, but to walk it wisely for a time. He prepares not for permanence, but for transformation. This is why fortune, that wild, blind force, favors the bold. Not because they are reckless, but because they act while others calculate. They move when others doubt, and in that movement, they find the one. Thing no title can guarantee: continuance. Machiavelli died without honor. His book, The Prince, was condemned by the very men whose lives it sought to illuminate. He was branded a heretic, a corrupter of morals, a servant of the devil. And yet, like all truths too sharp for their age, his work survived, copied in secret, passed hand to hand among rulers, studied by generals, whispered in the courts of popes and presidents. The very people who burned his name could not resist his insight. They dismissed him publicly and devoured him privately, because they knew, as he knew, that behind every act of power lies a calculation too cold for public speech, but too vital to ignore. Today, Machiavelli is not just a name. He is a warning, a mirror, a weapon. Machiavellian has come to mean manipulation, cunning, ruthlessness, but that is the lie history tells to comfort itself. Machiavelli did not glorify evil. He revealed necessity. He did not invent the cruelty of kings. He diagnosed it. He was not a monster. He was the doctor who dared to describe the disease. His sin was honesty. His crime was clarity. And for this, he became immortal. A philosopher without illusions, a realist in a world addicted to masks. And like all prophets, he was hated for telling us what we already knew but refused to admit, that power is not earned by those who are good, but by those who are willing to do what goodness cannot. This is the legacy of the prince, not cruelty, not cynicism, but clarity over comfort. Machiavelli did not want leaders to become monsters. He wanted them to stop pretending they were saints. He knew that when morality collapses under pressure, what remains is instinct, will, decision. And so he trained the leader to think like a survivor, not a preacher. He taught him to see beyond praise, beyond ideals, beyond applause, to see results. For what is morality if it leads to ruin? What is compassion if it costs the lives of many to protect the pride of one? Machiavelli gave the world a brutal gift, the tools to endure. And yet he left us no answers, only sharpened questions. Should you be feared or loved? Should you act or wait? Should you lie or perish? He does not tell you what to choose. He simply tells you what each choice costs. And that is the unbearable weight of leadership, not choosing between good and evil, but between what works and what destroys. 5 centuries later, these dilemmas have not changed. They hide in boardrooms, echo in election speeches, pulse beneath every difficult decision. To lead is to carry that weight without flinching and without illusion. So now the mirror turns toward you. If power were placed in your hands, true power with no strings, no oversight, no mercy, what would you do? Would you cling to ideals, hoping the world bends around your virtue? Or would you shape the world as it is, accepting its darkness so you might survive the storm? Machiavelli does not seduce you into evil. He dares you to be honest. Can you look? At power without blinking? Can you lead without lying to yourself? These are not questions for politicians alone. They are questions for anyone who dares to influence, to direct, to command. Leadership, in any form, is a moral abyss. And to step into it without falling requires more than intention. It requires vision without delusion. If this journey through the prince shattered your illusions, good. That was the point. Now you see what rulers have always known, what history has always whispered. What Machiavelli screamed through the veil of centuries: the world does not reward virtue. It rewards those who understand its rules and are willing to play. If you found value in this clarity, if the storm no longer frightens you, then step forward. Like, comment, and subscribe. Because power, like knowledge, is only dangerous when kept in the dark.